Emily married Daniel when she was 19. They had been inseparable since their final year of high school in a small coastal town in Oregon. Daniel had been her first love, the boy who walked her home after debate club and carved their initials into the old cedar tree behind the football field. They both spoke about college, travel, careers in vague, optimistic terms, convinced that life would somehow arrange itself around their love. The pregnancy changed the timeline. Emily had planned to move to Portland to study landscape design. Daniel wanted to become an engineer. Instead, a quiet courthouse ceremony replaced dorm tours and campus orientations. They moved into the spare bedroom of Emily's parents' farmhouse on the outskirts of town, a white wooden house surrounded by apple trees and wide, wind-brushed fields. Emily's parents reacted with a mixture of concern and determination. They were not thrilled about how quickly everything had happened, but they believed in responsibility and in family. Her mother rearranged her work schedule at the local clinic to help with the baby once she arrived. Her father, a practical man with weathered hands, converted the old storage shed into a nursery workspace for Emily to study in peace. Daniel transferred to an online engineering program and took a job at a shipping warehouse near the highway. It wasn't glamorous work. He came home smelling of diesel and cardboard dust, shoulders aching, but he insisted it was temporary. He would finish his degree, find a better job, and provide properly for his family. When their daughter Lily was born, Emily was only halfway through her first year of remote classes. The baby cried often at night, and Emily sometimes found herself studying soil composition at 3 a.m. while rocking Lily with one foot against the cradle. Her mother would take over at dawn so Emily could sleep before lectures. Daniel tried to help, but exhaustion dulled his focus, and sometimes he simply collapsed onto the couch still wearing his boots. By the time Emily graduated, her parents had quietly helped them save for a modest 2-bedroom condo in a neighboring town. They contributed a large portion of the down payment, insisting it was an investment in their granddaughter's stability. Daniel's family, on the other hand, remained distant. Daniel's mother, Sandra, lived in Arizona, in a gated community outside Phoenix. She had divorced Daniel's father when he was a toddler and had left him in the care of her own mother in Oregon while she started over. She visited irregularly during his childhood, sometimes twice a year, sometimes not at all. She sent expensive sneakers, video game consoles, and elaborate birthday packages that arrived with glittery cards signed in looping script. "Love you endlessly, Mom." Daniel grew up clinging to those parcels. His grandmother, a patient woman who smelled of lavender and baking bread, never spoke badly about Sandra. She told Daniel that his mother worked hard and traveled because she wanted to give him a better future. Daniel believed her completely. In his mind, his mother was a glamorous, misunderstood heroine forced by circumstance to stay away. Sandra eventually returned to Oregon after her third marriage collapsed. She moved into her mother's house with Daniel and rarely worked. Child support payments from her most recent ex-husband and her mother's pension covered most expenses. Daniel, now a teenager, was ecstatic to have her nearby. He didn't question why she hadn't taken him with her years before. He only basked in the rare afternoons when she asked about his classes or watched a movie with him. After Emily and Daniel married, Sandra maintained her distance. She called Daniel occasionally, always affectionate, always praising him for being such a strong man. She rarely asked about Emily except in passing. When she did visit, it was brief and carefully curated. She brought expensive gifts for Lily, but never offered to babysit or help in practical ways. Meanwhile, Emily's parents were constantly present. They drove over with groceries when work became overwhelming. They helped repaint the condo. They watched Lily during midterms. When Emily mentioned, almost jokingly, that she had always dreamed of opening a small landscape design studio that specialized in eco-friendly garden planning, her father leaned back in his chair and asked practical questions about permits and startup costs. The idea took root. Emily began designing backyard plans for neighbors in her spare time. She sketched layouts at the kitchen table while Lily colored beside her. Word spread through local community boards. Within 2 years, She had enough steady clients to consider renting a tiny office space downtown. The initial investment came from the sale of Emily's grandparents' cabin in the mountains. Her parents insisted she use the proceeds. "It's better to build something living than to let the money sit in a bank," her mother said. Daniel supported the idea enthusiastically. He attended meetings with her, helped assemble office furniture, and learned basic bookkeeping to manage invoices. When her client list doubled within a year, he suggested leaving his warehouse job to join her full-time. "We can grow this faster together," he said, eyes bright with possibility. Emily hesitated, but eventually agreed. The business expanded from residential yards to commercial properties. They hired 2 junior designers and a part-time accountant. Daniel managed supply orders, contractor negotiations, and scheduling. On paper and in spirit, it became a family enterprise. Around this time, Daniel's grandmother passed away. The woman who had anchored his childhood was gone. Sandra inherited the house and moved fully back into it. Without her mother's pension and oversight, her financial situation became unstable. The child support from her ex-husband covered little more than her personal expenses, and she had grown accustomed to a lifestyle that exceeded her means. It started with small requests. She called Daniel, explaining that she needed help replacing an aging air conditioner. Then she mentioned that her younger daughter, Daniel's half-sister, Mia, needed new school supplies. Daniel transferred money without hesitation. "She's alone now," he told Emily. "Grandma isn't there anymore. It's my responsibility." At first, the sums were manageable. A few $100s here, 1,000 there. But over months, the requests became routine. Sandra began calling before rent was due, before utility bills arrived. Daniel started setting aside a fixed portion of the business income each month for her. Emily noticed the pattern but kept her concerns measured. The company was thriving, they were not struggling. Yet she couldn't ignore the imbalance. Sandra was only 47, healthy, capable of working. She mentioned job searches, but never seemed to secure anything long-term. One evening, Daniel casually informed Emily that Sandra and Mia were planning a trip to California for Sandra's birthday. "She's had a hard year," he said. "I thought we could cover the flights and hotel. Just this once." Emily stared at the spreadsheet open on her laptop. They had been planning a family trip to Vancouver for Lily's 8th birthday. The deposit hadn't been paid yet. "How much?" she asked carefully. "About 4,000, Daniel replied. "It's not that bad." It wasn't catastrophic. The business could absorb it. But something tightened in Emily's chest, a quiet warning she couldn't yet articulate. She agreed reluctantly, telling herself it was temporary, that grief sometimes made people behave unpredictably. She did not realize that this was only the beginning. The California trip was supposed to be an exception. That was how Daniel framed it when Emily brought up her concerns weeks later. Sandra had posted photos online, beachside dinners, spa days, shopping bags from designer outlets. In every picture she looked radiant and carefree, her arm looped casually through Mia's. Daniel had liked every post within minutes of them appearing. Emily tried not to resent the images. She told herself that grief affected people differently, that Sandra deserved a little joy after losing her mother. But when she reviewed the quarterly financial statements for the business, the numbers told a quieter, less sentimental story. They had postponed their Vancouver vacation. They had delayed upgrading equipment for one of their larger commercial contracts. Cash flow was tighter than she liked to admit. Then the requests resumed. Sandra called one afternoon claiming the plumbing in the inherited house had collapsed and flooded part of the basement. Repairs would cost thousands. Daniel transferred money the same evening without consulting Emily. "It's an emergency," he explained. "What was I supposed to do?" Emily swallowed her frustration. "You could have talked to me first." "It's our business," Daniel replied, his tone sharpening slightly. "I'm not asking permission to help my own mother." The phrasing lingered with her long after the conversation ended. Over the next several months, Sandra's financial emergencies multiplied. A new car was necessary because the old one was unreliable. Mia needed orthodontic treatment. Property taxes were unexpectedly high. Each time Daniel reassured Emily that it would stabilize soon. Each time the amounts grew larger. By the time autumn arrived, Daniel was transferring close to $6,000 a month to Sandra. It was no longer occasional assistance, it was a dependency. Emily attempted a more structured conversation. One evening, after Lily was asleep, she printed out their profit margins and laid them across the dining table. "We've worked too hard for this," she said quietly. "We can't keep treating the business like an open wallet." Daniel rubbed his temples. "You're exaggerating." "I'm not," she insisted. "She's not working, Daniel. She's 47. She's healthy. Why are we funding her lifestyle?" "She's had instability her whole life," he replied defensively. "She deserves support." Emily felt a sharp flash of disbelief. Instability? Sandra had chosen each new marriage, each move, each restart. Daniel, as a child, had been the one left behind. But Daniel didn't see it that way. To him, every dollar he sent was proof that he was a better son than circumstance had allowed him to be before. Sandra's gratitude fed something fragile in him, something formed in childhood, when love arrived in gift boxes instead of bedtime stories. The real rupture came 3 months later. Emily was reviewing payroll one afternoon when she noticed a substantial withdrawal from their joint account, $35,000. At first she assumed it was a contractor payment scheduled early. But no such invoice existed. She called Daniel immediately. "Oh," he said, too casually. "I was going to tell you." Her pulse quickened. "Tell me what?" "Mom wants to renovate the kitchen. The house is outdated, and she thinks improving it will increase its value. It's an investment." Emily felt the air thin around her. "You gave her $35,000? "It's just the first part. The full remodel will cost around $90,000. She couldn't speak for several seconds. $90,000 was not pocket change. It was expansion capital. It was future security. It was Lily's education fund. "You didn't ask me," she finally said, her voice dangerously calm. Daniel exhaled impatiently. "Why does everything have to be a negotiation? I contribute to this business, too." "Yes, you do," she agreed. "But the original capital was mine. The legal ownership is mine. We make financial decisions together." "This is my family," he snapped. "She's not some stranger." "And I'm what?" Emily shot back. "An investor you don't have to consult?" The argument escalated rapidly. Years of suppressed resentment surfaced at once. Emily accused Sandra of manipulation. Daniel accused Emily of cruelty. Words were said that could not be retracted. When Daniel insisted that he had every right to allocate funds as he saw fit, something inside Emily shifted from anger to clarity. The next morning she met with their attorney. The business had always been registered under her name for tax efficiency. Daniel was listed as an employee and operations manager, not a co-owner. At the time, it had seemed like a practical detail. Now it became a protective boundary. When Daniel returned home that evening, Emily was waiting in the living room. "I've removed your access to the primary account," she told him steadily. "You'll receive a salary like any other manager until we decide what happens next." Daniel stared at her as if she had struck him. "You don't trust me?" "I don't trust what's happening," she replied. The following weeks were strained and brittle. Daniel moved into the guest room. Conversations became transactional. Sandra, meanwhile, intensified her contact, perhaps sensing instability. She called Daniel daily, sometimes multiple times, describing delays in the remodel, unexpected contractor fees, additional upgrades that would only cost a little more. Emily began to feel as though her marriage had become a financial conduit between her labor and Sandra's desires. The breaking point arrived on a gray November afternoon. Emily received a notification from the bank. Another large transfer attempt, $50,000. This time, however, the transaction had been blocked due to insufficient authorization. She drove directly to the office warehouse where Daniel was meeting suppliers. "Were you trying to send her more money?" she demanded the moment she stepped inside. Daniel looked cornered, embarrassed in front of the staff. "Lower your voice. Answer me." She needed to finalize the renovation. I told her I would help. With what money? Emily asked. You don't have access anymore. He hesitated. I was going to move it from the secondary account. The secondary account contained funds earmarked for a major municipal contract they had been negotiating for nearly a year. If that money disappeared, they would lose credibility and possibly face penalties. Emily felt something fracture completely. That's it, she said quietly. That night she packed Daniel's belongings into suitcases and placed them by the front door. You're choosing her over us, she said, tears finally surfacing. Over Lily. That's not fair, he argued. I'm just trying to help. At our expense, she replied. Every time. Daniel left to stay with Sandra. Within weeks, the illusion dissolved. Without substantial transfers, Sandra's patience evaporated. She criticized Daniel for not earning enough independently. She complained about his reduced contributions. The praise he once received for being the perfect son turned into accusations of selfishness. For the first time, Daniel experienced her affection without the currency attached. Emily filed for divorce quietly. She focused on stabilizing the business, securing the municipal contract, and maintaining normalcy for Lily. The legal process was painful but straightforward. There were no shared business assets to divide, no hidden ownership disputes. Months passed. Daniel eventually moved out of Sandra's house and into a modest apartment closer to town. He found a mid-level operations job at a construction firm. His salary was stable but significantly lower than what he had earned with the business. Sandra's calls decreased when the money stopped entirely. And somewhere in that silence, Daniel began to see the pattern he had spent a lifetime denying. He requested to meet Emily for coffee one evening in early spring. He looked older, thinner, but clearer somehow. I didn't see it, he admitted quietly. I thought I was fixing something from my childhood. I didn't realize I was breaking what I had. Emily listened without interruption. He spoke about therapy, about recognizing how deeply he had tied his worth to his mother's approval, about finally understanding that love should not require constant payment. Emily felt the familiar warmth of history between them, years of partnership, shared risks, shared dreams. But she also remembered the bank notifications, the arguments, the moment of final clarity. Trust, once fractured, did not rebuild itself overnight. Daniel asked for another chance. Emily did not answer immediately. Spring arrived slowly that year, as if even the seasons were hesitant to commit. The rain lingered longer than usual, leaving the sidewalks slick and reflective, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. Emily found comfort in the familiarity of growth. Trees budded again no matter how harsh the winter had been. Lawns that looked dead in February turned stubbornly green in April. She poured herself into work. The municipal contract they had secured became the largest project her company had ever handled, redesigning several public park spaces to include sustainable irrigation systems and native plant landscaping. It demanded long hours, constant site visits, and negotiations with city officials. It also reaffirmed something Emily had nearly forgotten in the chaos of her marriage. She was exceptionally good at what she did. The divorce finalized quietly in early May. There were no dramatic court scenes, no public disputes. Daniel had not fought her over the business. In fact, he had signed the papers with an almost resigned calmness, as if accepting that consequences were simply overdue. They agreed on shared custody of Lily. Daniel kept his promise about therapy. At first, Emily dismissed it as a tactic, a temporary performance designed to win her back. But as months passed, subtle changes became visible. He no longer spoke defensively when Sandra came up. He didn't flinch or redirect. He didn't romanticize her sacrifices. He rarely mentioned her at all. Sandra, for her part, did not disappear entirely. She sent Emily occasional text messages, always framed politely, sometimes with thinly veiled entitlement. I hope you're well. I was wondering if you might be able to loan me a small amount until next month. I know things ended between you and Daniel, but we're still family in a way. Emily never replied. If Sandra contacted Daniel now, it was different. Lily would occasionally mention that Grandma Sandra called, but the conversations were short. There were no more lavish gifts arriving on the doorstep. No more urgent emergencies. Daniel had drawn a line. The first time he came to Emily's office after the divorce, he stood awkwardly near the doorway, hands in his jacket pockets. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said quickly, sensing her tension. "I just wanted to drop off Lily's backpack. She forgot it in my car." Emily nodded and took it from him. He glanced around the expanded office, new drafting tables, additional staff, framed design awards lining one wall. "You've built something incredible," he said, not bitterly, not resentfully, just factually. She studied his face for sarcasm, but found none. "Thank you," she replied. There was a time when she would have interpreted his presence in her professional space as intrusion. Now it felt different, lighter, less entitled. Still, caution remained her instinct. Weeks later, Daniel asked if they could talk properly, not about Lily, not about schedules, but about them. Emily hesitated for days before agreeing. They met at a quiet restaurant along the river, neutral ground far from old arguments. Daniel spoke first. "I know I don't deserve another chance automatically," he said. "I understand that. But I need you to know something clearly. I've cut off financial support to my mom completely. Not as punishment, not out of anger, but because I finally understand that I was enabling something unhealthy for her and for me." Emily remained silent, listening. "She's angry," he continued. "She says I've changed, that I've become selfish. Maybe I have, but I can't build my life around her approval anymore." There was no dramatic bitterness in his voice, only exhaustion and acceptance. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away," he added. "I'm asking for time to show you that I can be different." Emily stared at the river through the restaurant window. The water moved steadily, indifferent to personal revelations. "What happens," she asked quietly, "if she calls you tomorrow crying? If she says she's about to lose her house? If she tells you she has nowhere to go?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. This time he didn't rush to prove anything. "I help her find a job," he said finally. "I help her contact a financial advisor. I don't open my wallet. And if she says you're abandoning her?" He inhaled slowly. "Then I accept that she's allowed to feel that way." It was the first time Emily had heard him separate responsibility from guilt. The months that followed were careful and deliberate. They did not rush back into living together. Daniel continued in his new job. Emily focused on expanding her firm into neighboring counties. Lily adjusted surprisingly well, perhaps sensing the reduced tension between her parents. They began spending occasional evenings together as a family, casual dinners, school events, weekend park visits. Emily watched closely for signs of regression. Old reflexes. Secret transfers. Defensive reactions. They didn't appear. Instead, Daniel spoke openly about therapy sessions, about recognizing how his childhood had shaped his need to earn love, about how Sandra's absence had created a vacuum he had spent decades trying to fill with money and compliance. One evening, while helping Lily with homework at the kitchen table in Emily's house, Daniel received a call. Sandra's name lit up his screen. Emily's body tensed automatically. Daniel looked at the phone, then at Emily. Without dramatics, he declined the call and placed the phone face down. "She can leave a voicemail," he said calmly. It was a small gesture, but it landed heavily. Later that night, Emily lay awake considering everything. Love had never fully disappeared. That had been the complicated part. If she had stopped caring entirely, the decision would have been simple. But she still saw the young man who had carried boxes into their first office, who had stayed up past midnight assembling nursery furniture, who had believed in her when the business was only an idea sketched in pencil. The problem had never been love. It had been boundaries. 2 weeks later, Sandra escalated. She appeared unannounced at Emily's office, her expression composed but tight. "I just want to talk," she insisted. Emily agreed, out of curiosity, more than obligation. Sandra spoke in polished sentences about misunderstanding, about family unity, about how difficult life had been for her. She implied that Emily had influenced Daniel against her. She suggested that reconciliation between mother and son required generosity. Emily listened without interruption. When Sandra finally paused, Emily responded calmly. Daniel's relationship with you is his responsibility. But my business and my finances are not part of that relationship anymore. They never will be again. Sandra's smile thinned. You're turning him against his own mother.
No, Emily replied steadily.
I'm refusing to finance a dynamic that was hurting my family. Sandra left without another word. When Daniel learned about the visit, he didn't explode. He didn't rush to defend Sandra. He sighed almost sadly. She doesn't know how to exist without being supported, he said. That's not your job to fix, Emily answered. By summer, something had shifted fully. Daniel suggested couples counseling, not as a condition for reunion, but as preparation. If we try again, he said, I want to build it differently. Emily agreed. They discussed financial safeguards, separate personal accounts, joint decisions documented, clear limits regarding extended family support, transparency without surveillance. Trust did not reappear like a switch flipped on. It rebuilt slowly, through consistency. On a warm August evening, nearly a year after Daniel had moved out, he stood once more in Emily's living room, not as a husband returning automatically, but as a man asking. I love you, he said simply, but I won't pressure you. If you decide that what we had is better left in the past, I'll respect that. Emily looked around the home she had stabilized alone, the business she had protected, the child sleeping down the hall. Then she looked at Daniel, not the boy seeking his mother's approval, but a man who had finally confronted the truth of his own patterns. Moving back in doesn't mean everything is erased, she said carefully. It means we're starting over. With rules. With boundaries. Daniel nodded without hesitation. I understand. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt that he truly did. Their story did not end in dramatic triumph or bitter separation. It continued, altered, cautious, more aware. Love, she had learned, was not enough by itself. It required structure. It required courage. It required the willingness to say no, even to the people who once defined you. Whether their second beginning would last forever remained uncertain. But this time, it would not be financed by guilt.